All right, I will say good morning. It is an incredible schos Baruch Hashem to be able to learn with you today. I'm sorry that I can't be with you in person, but at least in Metzia we have the opportunity to still learn together, albeit virtually. So today's daf is Ayin Beis 72, and we are picking up in Metzia on Ayin Aleph Amud Beis 71b, and we are picking up Rav Ashi Amar, which is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, about 17 lines up from the bottom. So now the Gemara is going to pick up. Remember again, the Gemara kind of went off a little, not on a tangent, but the Gemara was trying to explain a case. And in the midst of explaining that case, the Gemara dropped the concept that there is no shlichos for an akum, that there's no concept of agency when it comes to a non-Jew. Gentiles. The Gemara says, Rav Ashi Amar, ki amrinan ein shlichos lenochri hani mili b'truma. So Rav Ashi says like this. When do we say that there's no shlichos for an akum, that there's no halachic construct of agency? That's dafka by truma. In other words, I can't appoint a non-Jew to separate truma from my produce on my behalf. But Rav Ashi says it's only in by truma. We'll see why truma is unique. But by the rest of Torah, you absolutely could appoint a Gentile as your agent. Rav Ashi Barusi. The Gemara says, by the way, Rav Ashi's concept is a mistake. Rav Ashi's wrong. Rashi's wrong. So the Gemara says, Maishna Truma Dalo. So first of all, what would be unique about Truma? That halacha l'maisa, there's no agency by Truma. D'chsev atem gam atem. As about to say, the pasuk by Truma says as follows: Kein tarimu gam atem trumas Hashem nikol masro seichem. So the pasuk says that gam atem, also you will separate out truma. So the Gemara says ma atem b'nei bris. So remember, generally, gam, the word gam is a ribu. It comes to include something else. So gam atem is coming to include something on top of atem. So what does that mean? Ma atem b'nei bris, just like you, right? We're Jewish. Af shluchachem nami b'nei bris. So to again, your agents have to be members of the covenant as well, have to be Jews as well. Incredible. So the Gemara says, furthermore, shlichos techala Torah kula nami mitruma gamrin Allah. And by the way, truma becomes the paradigm. Just like by truma, there is no agency for an akum. A non-Jew can't be the agent of a Jew for separation of truma. It's not just unique by truma, but it's the entire Torah. A non-Jew cannot act as the agent of a Jew. Elad Rav Ashi Barusi. So therefore, Rav Ashi's original statement, namely that the concept of ein shlichos la'akum, that there's no agency for a Gentile, Rav Ashi said only applies to truma, doesn't apply to anything else. The Gemara now says that's a mistake. There is no halachic construct of agency by a Gentile for a Jew in any area of halacha. And I will say, just the logic, it's actually intuitive, right? The logic is shlucho shel adam kimoso, right? The concept of shlichos is that my agency is an extension of myself. As such, in order for my agent to be an extension of me, the agent has to have some shared identity as I do. And therefore, because obviously again, a Jew and non-Jew have two different identities, therefore again, ein shlichos la'akum. A Jew cannot appoint a nochri to fulfill a formal halachic shlichos. Igedarmi, an alternate version of this, Amar Rav Ashi, ki amrinan ein shlichos la'nochri. So Rashi is like this: when we say that there's no shlichos for a nochri, hani mili inhu lididon. So that's ultimately again that a nochri, a non-Jew, can't serve as my agent. Avalanon lidido havinu luhu shliach. But so Nachri can't serve as my agent, but I can serve as a Nachri's agent. V'had Rav Ashi Barusa, the Gemara says, but this is also a mistaken statement. Maishna inu lididon delo. So we'll say, so why can't a Nachri serve as my agent? Because the pasuk says, Atem gam atem l'rabo shluchachem, ma atem b'nei bris af shluchachem b'nei bris. So we'll say, so we're not from Truma, right? The pasuk, the phrase atem, you could separate out Truma. Gam atem, you could appoint an agent, but your agent has to be like you, i.e. Jewish. So the Gemara says, anan lididahu nami ma atem b'nei bris ka'amar. So therefore, we'll say, again, this works both ways. The Gemara says, just intuitively, if I can't appoint a nochri as my shaliach, then by definition, I can't go ahead and fulfill agency for the nochri either. Ella had Rav Ashi Barusa. Rather, again, ultimately, Rav Ashi's statement was a mistake. Okay, so we'll say, so that's the two versions. That's the two versions of Rav Ashi. Good. So fine. Ravina introduces a new idea. He says, "Nihi d'shlichos l'nochri lesle zichim d'rabanan islay." So this is actually very interesting. The Gemara says, you're right. Ravina agrees essentially with the Gemara's first refutation of Rav Ashi, which is there's no shlichos for a nochri. There's no formal halachic construct of agency when it comes to a nochri. However, again, this is actually very interesting, but the Gemara says, Zechia midrabanan isle. But a Nachri does have almost a rabbinic right of acquisition. What does this mean? Take a look at Rashi. Zechia midrabanan isle. Shehei Yisrael zochel etzorech Nachri, hilchach ahu Yisrael zochanam midrabanan ba'avazu mi-Yisrael. So Ravina posits as follows. Although mid'oraisa, there is no concept of shlichus by a Nachri, but Chazal gave certain abilities for a Jew to transact certain things to acquire something for the Nachri. So there's no shlichus, but Chazal gave certain rights of acquisition for the Jew to acquire something on behalf of the non-Jew. Midi dehavi katan. Because in this respect, a Nachri should be no different than a katan. How so? That's very interesting. So katan, lav afal gav de lesli shlichus. Now remember, a katan can't appoint a shaliach, right? The katan doesn't have the ability to create shlichus. Yet, top of Ayin Beis, 72a, yet, islay zechia midrabanan. Yet, interestingly enough, one is able to acquire something on behalf of a katan. So you see from the Gemara is making this interesting idea that it could be that someone is not shaykh to the halachic construct of shlichus. So a particular individual can't be an agent, or no one can act in an agent capacity for him. But there's a concept of zechia. Zechia means someone has the ability to acquire something on your behalf. The paradigmatic example of this, a katan, a minor, can't create a shliach, yet someone could acquire something on his behalf. Hachanami loshna, Marsa maybe by a nachri, the same halacha. So a nachri, there's no shlichos by a nachri, but perhaps someone has the ability to acquire something on his behalf. To which the Gemara says, Hachanami loshna. Velohi, the Gemara says, not a good comparison. I'll tell you why. Yisrael asilach shlichos, akum lo asilach shlichos. It's very different. You see, a katan right now he can't appoint a shaliach because he's disqualified by age, but he'll get older, and once he becomes older, he's automatically included in the halachic construct of shlichos. An akum is never going to be included in the halachic construct of shlichos. So because of that, we can't give the akum zechia powers, right? We can't allow a Jew to acquire, halachically, to acquire something on his behalf as well. Very interesting. Tana Rabbanan. Let's go by Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam she'akol niyeh b'dvaro. Okay, so I will say, so by the way, just so you should know, the way we paskin is that halacha l'maisa in shlichus l'nachri. We paskin that halachically, there is no formal halachic construct of agency from a Jew to a Gentile or a Gentile to a Jew. And again, it's learned out from the concept of truma. Now again, I will say, obviously I can do something for a Nachri can do something for me, but it's my shlichos, right? Remember again, when we know shlichos is not somebody just doing you a favor. Shlucho shel adam kimoso, a shaliach is empowered to really act in place of the principle. That concept only applies by Jews, doesn't apply ultimately again between Jews and non-Jews. Incredible. But it's a very interesting case. Tanabanan. Yisrael shalava maos min anachri beribis. Very interesting case here. A Yisrael borrowed money from a non-Jew with ribis. Mutter, right? We paskin that Jews and non-Jews could lend with interest to each other. Okay, so now let's play this out. Ruvain borrowed money from Nachri, and he borrowed with interest. Fine. V'zakfan Allah b'milva. Now something interesting happened afterwards. So let's say Ruvain borrowed $5,000 from Nachri and $1,000 interest. So now the whole thing came due. So what Nachri essentially did is they rewrote the note. And the note was rewritten as Ruvain owes Nachri $6,000. They consolidated the entire debt. So essentially, they converted interest plus principal just into one payment of principal. Okay, look at Rashi. V'zakfan Allah b'milva, la'achar zman chishev imo ala ribis, v'zokef hakol b'yachad b'milva, v'kasav lo shtar aleim kach v'kach ani chayev l'ploni. So essentially, they rewrote a new loan document. But again, they consolidated the principal and the interest into one document. Okay, now watch. So far, no problem. Now watch this. V'nisgayer. Oh, now the Nachri converts. So Nachri becomes Shimon. So now Shimon has in his hand a note, a loan document that says that Reuven owes him $6,000. Now remember again, that $6,000 is really a combination of principal and interest. So the shaila now is, does Shimon have the ability to collect the money or not? What a great case. So the Gemara says it depends. Im kodim sheniskayir zakfan ala b'milva govas hakar v'govas haribis. If they will call it a loan conversion, right, combining or consolidating principal and interest into one loan, if that took place before Shimon converted, then ultimately again, Shimon has the ability to collect the entire debt after he converts. However, if halacha l'maisa, the debt consolidation or debt conversion, loan conversion, took place after Shimon converted. So Shimon converted, then they transformed the 5,000 principal, 1,000 interest into a new $6,000 debt. Then again, that halacha l'maisa, Shimon could collect principal, but he can't collect interest. Very interesting. So I will say the reverse case as well. Listen to this. Let's watch this. Ruvain lent. This is case 2. Ruvain lent Nachri money with interest. He lent Nachri $5,000 with $1,000 interest. Okay. Same case. Then afterwards, they go ahead and they consolidated the debt into a loan of $6,000 and they put it into a new document. And this is what Nachri owes Ruvain. Now I'll say what happens. Now Nachri converts. So the Gemara says, it's really the same halacha. So if the debt conversion, if the loan conversion took place before Nachri converted, then ultimately again Reuven has the ability to collect the entire amount, principal and interest. However, if halacha l'maisa, the debt conversion and debt consolidation took place after Nachri converted, then goves hakeren ve'ena goves haribis. Then halacha l'maisa, Reuven has the ability to collect the principal, but not the interest. Now I'll say, watch this. Rabbi Yossi says, absolutely not. Nachri shalava ma'os mi yisrael beribis, ben kach u ben kach gove es hakeren ve'gove es haribis. Rabbi Yossi says, not true. In a case where a Jew lent a Nachri money, and then they did this debt conversion, whether the debt conversion occurred before Nachri converted or after Nachri converted, doesn't make a difference. Reuven has the ability to collect the entire amount. What's the pshat? Amar Rava, Amar Rav Chisda, Amar Rav Huna. Halach Rabbi Yossi. Halach Rabbi Yossi. So the Gemara says, Amar Rava, my time Rabbi Yossi. What's Rabbi Yossi's logic? Kedei shelo yomru b'shvil ma'osav niskayer zeh. Wow. So Rabbi Yossi, here's what we're concerned about. We're concerned that if a Nachri knows that if he converts, he's able to get out of certain interest payments depending on how the debt consolidation took place, then we're concerned that he will convert for the wrong reasons. So what do? In order to go ahead and take away that concern, the halacha is if Reuven lent Nachri money and then reconsolidated the debt into one comprehensive debt, whether he did that before Nachri converted or after Nachri converted, Reuven is entitled to collect the entire amount in order not to cast any aspersions on the conversion of Nachri, right? That people shouldn't think that he converted just in order to avoid the debt. Okay, incredible. But that being said, the first part still remains in effect. So halacha l'maisa, if you have a situation of the Jew who borrowed from the non-Jew, right? So Reuven borrowed from Nachri, and then again reconsolidated the debt, and then Nachri converts. Can Nachri collect the entire amount or not? It depends. With debt consolidation took place before his conversion, then Shimon could collect the entire amount. If debt consolidation ultimately took place after Nachri, now known as Shimon converted, he could collect principal, not interest. Again, if it's a situation of a Jewish lender and a Gentile borrower, whether the consolidation took place before the conversion or after the conversion, either way, Reuven, the Jewish lender, could collect the entire amount. Incredible. So we'll say, okay, so now we're going to get into some interesting technical issues over here. Let's say you have a situation of a document that has ribis, right? So Reuven lent Shimon $5,000, and in it is $1,000 of interest. Okay, so now, illegal document. The shaila is the document usable for anything? Rabbi Meir says, no. The document essentially is invalid, and the document cannot be used to collect principal nor interest. Pretty incredible. So the Gemara says as follows. Chacham say, no, Chacham say, no. You could use the document to collect principal, you just can't use it to collect interest. Says the Gemara b'Maikim and Flagis. So what are they arguing about? Rabbi Meir savar kansinan hetera mishum isura. V'Rabbanan sabri lo kansinan hetera mishum isura. So we'll say, so essentially here's the machlokes. Rabbi Meir says like this. Although technically speaking, you should be able to use this document to collect principal, but we're knassing you, we're penalizing you. You did something wrong, you did something inappropriate, and we're concerned that if we let you use the document to collect principal, you're going to end up trying to use the document to collect interest as well. Therefore, we penalize you. You can't use the document to collect anything. The Rabbanan is saying, no, we don't say that. We don't say that. Again, you can't collect the interest because that's a void part of the document, but you absolutely could collect principal with this document. Incredible. And Lashon of Kansinan Hetera Ater Isura, that should we penalize you in terms of preclude you from collecting the part that is permitted, lest you come to collect the part that is prohibited. Tanan Hasan, we learned there, Shtari Chov Hamukdamin Psulin V'Hamucharin Kshen. So we'll say this is a really interesting. So you actually saw this a little bit in our Ksuvas days as well. There's something called the Shtar Mukdam. A Shtar Mukdam means that a document that is dated earlier than the actual transaction. So for example, let's say today is the first day of Iyar. Second day of Iyar. And now what happens? So Ruvain is lending Shimon $10,000. If Ruvain dates the document instead the 25th of Nisan, then what's the problem? The date on a document, loan document, creates a lien against the borrower's real property. If it's dated early, that backs up the lien, which is unfair because let's say Shimon sold off some property between the 25th of Nisan and the 2nd of Iyar. That property, technically speaking, is unencumbered. Yet when you look at the document on the date, it looks like a shtar mukdam, right? We look at the document on the date. When you look at the date in the document, it'll give the lender the ability to collect from an earlier date where he doesn't really have an entitlement, thereby defrauding people who bought property legally and free of any encumbrances from Shimon. So therefore, the halacha is what we call a shtar mukdam, a predated document. The document dated early in the actual transaction is pasul. Conversely, v'hameucharin ksherin. What about a document, a post-dated document? So in other words, let's say we transact this deal on Beis Iyar, but I write the date, right? The transaction is happening Beis Iyar, but instead we date it for the 10th of Iyar. So I will say, here's what's interesting about that. The only person that puts it at disadvantage is the lender, because that means then the lender just has a later lien. If the lender is willing to accept that and it doesn't matter to him, if it doesn't matter to him, it doesn't matter to us. And that's absolutely fine. So the Gemara will say, first wide line, mukdam and amay psulin. So why is the shtar mukdam? Why is a predated document pasul? Nihi lo gavo mizman rishon nigvo mizman sheni. I don't understand. So fine, you can't go ahead and collect based on, when we say collect, let's say in the event that it's a loan and the borrower defaulted. So now again, the lender is going to be able to collect encumbered properties. So I understand you can't use the date in the document. But why can't you at least go ahead and use the actual date of the transaction, even though it's not recorded in the document? If we know the date of the transaction, that's when the encumbrances began. Because we'll say ultimately, again, this is a machlokas, and this is reflective of the view of Rabbi Meir. Now remember again, what does Rabbi Meir hold? Rabbi Meir holds kansinan hetera ater isura. Essentially, Rabbi Meir says is like this. When you have a flawed document, essentially once the document is flawed, either because, like in this case, it's predated, or for example, again, like we saw earlier on, it has ribis in it. And Meir says we don't let you use the document. We don't let you use the document because we're going to penalize you, even regarding the permitted parts of the document, lest you come to go ahead and use the document in an illegal and inappropriate fashion. So therefore, Rabbi Meir says, shtar mukdam, not good at all. For Rabbi Yochanan says, afil tim rabbanon. The truth is, no, even the rabbanon would agree in this case. Why? Gzera shema yigba mizman rishon. Because they both say this is dangerous. This is actually dangerous to have a predated document with a document ultimately again that has an earlier date. You really could mess people over with that, and even the rabbanon would agree that Allah Chalamaisa, such a document is not good. I will say, by the way, that is how we paskin. We paskin that a shtar mukdam is going to go ahead and be pasul. This comes up. This is why when doing a chasana, we're very careful to make sure that the date on the ksuva is the same date as the chuppah, in order to avoid any potential shtar mukdam issues, right? Because let's say if chassan and kala get married, or let's say they write the ksuba by day, but the chuppah doesn't take place until that night, technically speaking, the shibud, the lien created by the ksuba, starts by day, but yet ultimately the marriage doesn't occur by night. So try very carefully to make sure that everything is aligned with each other. Okay, Hu Gavra, the mashkin li pardes lechare. So we'll say a very interesting case here. There was an individual who went ahead and he collateralized a pardes, an orchard, to his friend. So in other words, Ruvain lent money to Shimon, and Shimon gave Ruvain a pardes, an orchard as collateral. Achla tlas shani. So now what happened? So remember again, so now Ruvain the lender used the field for 3 years. Okay, so what happened? Amarle, imezabnis leineheli mutov v'i lo kavshina le l'shtar mashkanta va'amina l'kuche biyadi. I suppose it's an incredible case. So Ruvain the lender, has been using the field for 3 years. At the end of 3 years, he goes over to Shimon and says, Shimon, here's the deal. Sell me the orchard. If you don't sell me the orchard, I'm going to tear up the collateral document. So no one will know that this field was with me as collateral. And instead, the only thing they'll see is that I utilized it for 3 years. Now remember again, using property for 3 years is enough to establish chazaka. So essentially, Reuven was threatening Shimon, sell me the property, and if you don't sell me the property, essentially I'm going to take it illegally by claiming that I have a chazaka and you didn't contest to my usage of it for 3 years. So we'll say, so what? So now, what did Shimon do? So Shimon did something very interesting. Shimon's like, okay, you want to do that? Here's what we're going to do. Shimon gifted the orchard to his son. So let's imagine for a moment that, right, this is happening on Beis Iyar. So Shimon gifted the orchard to his son, and he wrote a gift document, the shtar, dated on the 2nd of Iyar, I, Shimon, gifted this orchard to my son. He then sold it to, quote unquote, sold it to Reuven, but Reuven's shtar was dated Gimel Iyar. So therefore, I will say, it turns out that there's documentation that a gift was given before the sale, which means that by definition, the sale is void. This is how Shimon prevented Reuven from forcing him to sell the property. So the Gemara says, right, Zvine vade lohavi. So we'll say, so obviously it works. In other words, that obviously the sale, quote unquote, the sale from Shimon to Reuven never took effect. Why? Because the gift from Shimon to his son took effect first. The Gemara says, Zuze kimilva b'shtar damo v'gava b'nechasim mishubadim, o dilma kamilva al ped damo v'enakova b'nechasim mishubadim. So here's what's interesting. What about the price? Remember again, so Reuven was forcing Shimon to sell. He wasn't trying to, I guess it's theft. It is theft, right? It's chamas actually, right? Forcing someone to sell something. But lamaisa, so Reuven paid money. So now I understand that the sale's not going to go into effect because ultimately the gift document from Shimon to his son preceded the sale document from Shimon to Reuven. So therefore the sale is void. Shaz, what about the money? So obviously now Shimon has to get back the money. Shimon owes Reuven the money. How do we view that debt? Is that considered to be a debt? A debt that is recorded in a document and therefore it's secured by real property? Or maybe it's just a verbal debt, right? The verbal loan, and therefore not secured by real property. Is this not the very case of Rabbi Asi? Rabbi Asi said, I will say, Ayin Beis Amud Beis 72b. Rabbi Asi said, Mode b'shtar shekasvu eino tzarech lekaimo. The government nechasim mishubadim. So we'll say in a case, ultimately again, where the parties agree, right? Rashi says over here, Mode b'shtar shekasvu me'achar shehilva shalova mode sheshtar chov shehotzi alav shtar emesu. Now generally, if the borrower admits that yes, he admits to the document, he admits to the transaction recorded in the document, then there's no need for kiyum shtaris. There's no need to certify the document. So again, I will say, so here, in this case over here, Shimon is admitting that he wrote the document to Reuven. He is. So therefore, the document is about, quote unquote, the document that even though the sale is void, the document is the document. And Shimon is admitting that he sold the document, that he wrote the document. As such, the money, right, that now Shimon owes Reuven, which was the purchase price that Reuven paid for the sale that was subsequently void because it was preceded by a gift from Shimon to his son. So that money now that Shimon owes Reuven is considered to be a loan recorded in a document, and therefore, again, should be secured by Shimon's real property. Amrle Rava Midami, come on, how can you compare that? Hasam Nitali Kasev. That's different because I will say in general, that case that we're talking about over there, the Mod Bishtar Shekasfu, is talking about a case where the actual transaction occurred and everyone agrees that the transaction occurred. Here, both say this transaction should have never been written down to begin with. Why should this transaction have never been written down to begin with? Because remember, halacha l'maisa, there was no real sale over here. Remember, Shimon gifted the property to his son even before he ever sold it to Reuven. As such, there's no real sale. So because there's no real sale, therefore the document itself is a void document. And although Shimon, of course, has to pay back Reuven the money that Reuven paid Shimon for the orchard, but it's considered to be a verbal loan, and therefore, again, it is not secured by real property. Incredible. Yasav Meimar v'kamar shmaita. So Meimar was sitting and giving over this ruling. Amar li Ravina Meimar ela had Amar Rabbi Yochanan gezera shema yigba mizman rishon. So we'll say, so one second. What about the concern that Rabbi Yochanan brought up? That ultimately, again, in a predated document, maybe the person is going to use the actual date recorded in the document itself, and thereby defraud purchasers. Nema lo nitin likasev. Why do we say such a document should have never been written to begin with? Amrle hachi hashta hasam nihid lo nitin likasev mizman rishon aval nitan likasev mizman sheni. They're both saying, in the shtar muktam case, in the shtar muktam, the predated get, that was the transaction itself was a valid transaction. And it should have been committed to writing. It's not a transactional issue. It's a date issue. Hacha lo nitin likasev klal. In this case, this is the right Reuven and Shimon, the forced sale of the orchard. That document should have never been written. The whole thing was inappropriate, and furthermore, again, it was already gifted away before the item was actually sold. So therefore, the document itself is totally and wholly void. Ela hadasanya, but that which we learned, the shevach karkos ketzad. So we'll say, so again, remember, that which we learned, that is shevach karkos. Now we'll say, if you take a look at Rashi, Rashi says over here, shevach karkos, Reisha didei ein motzia la'achilas peros l'shevach karkos m'nechasim mishubadim mibnei tikuna olam. So we'll say, so the halacha is that in seized property, so when it comes ultimately again to shevach karkos, if let's say again the person who was in possession of the property improved it, we don't go ahead and extract payment for that for improvements from the chasim mishubadim. So what's the case? And the Gemara says, what's the case? Ketzad harisha gazal. So it was actually quite a fascinating case. Harisha gazal sada mechabero. Listen to this. Reuven stole a field from Shimon. Umachra la'achar. And after Reuven stole it from Shimon, he sold it to Levi. Vishbicha, and Levi improved, right? Levi worked on the field, he improved the field. Vahari hi yose mitachas yado. So now what happens? So remember, Reuven stole it from Shimon, and afterwards again he sold it to Levi. Levi improved the property. Shimon finds out that Levi is now in possession of his property. Shimon goes to Levi and seizes back his property, which he has the right to do so. Now, of course, what's going to happen? So Levi is going to go back to Reuven for really two things. Number one, the purchase price. And number two, what we call the shavach, the improvements that he made. We'll say first wide line, 72b. So the Gemara says, V'hari yosef mitachas yado, kishu govas akar min nechasim mishubadim. So ultimately, again, when Levi comes to Reuven to collect money, so for Karen, for principal, he could collect from encumbered property, from real property. The shavach govim min nechasim minichorim. But ultimately, again, for any improvements, he could only collect that from unencumbered property, or again, property that Reuven himself still owns. B'nei chorin nemale lo nitin likasev. But one second. By B'nei chorin, at the end of the day, this document should have never been written, right? Because remember, again, Reuven wrote a document of sale to Levi for property that Reuven didn't own. So why don't we say that halacha l'maisa, this is an example of a shtar that should have never been written? The Gemara says, Hachi hashta hasam. This is very interesting. Ilaman de amar nechale delona kari gazlana. So I will say, this is, and the lashon of here is so fascinating that ultimately, again, usually what ends up happening, the Gemara says, is like this: when Reuven steals the field from Shimon and subsequently goes ahead and sells it to Levi. So what's going to end up happening, the Gemara says, is that Reuven is going to go and do his best to try to actually purchase it from Shimon. Why? Because Reuven doesn't want to be called a thief. Okay, and therefore again, halacha l'maisa, he's going to want to kind of straighten this, even though he made a mistake and he stole the property, but he's going to want to straighten this out that he shouldn't have the identity of a thief. Or I say, ultimately again, Reuven wants to be known as a trustworthy guy. And therefore, once again, he's going to go ahead and try to figure things out with Shimon. Rashi says over here, Mafis Leilu Marei, Lo Chamin Abaylam Harishonim, to which the Gemara says, Hacha Lavruche Mine Kamechavein Shtar Mekayim. So what the Gemara is making is the following distinction. In the case of the forced sale of the orchard, the whole chap over there is the document of sale that Shimon made to Ruvain. The whole thing was false. In other words, Shimon never meant to sell it to Ruvain. Shimon never wanted to sell it to Ruvain at all. There's no sale document. The document itself is false. In these other cases, interestingly enough, when Ruvain steals from Shimon and then sells it to Levi, the Gemara understands over here that at some point in time, Ruvain is going to try to do good by Shimon. He's going to pay him, he's going to smooth it over, he's going to take care of the theft, right? Why? Because Ruvain doesn't want to be called a gazlan, right? A ganav, or Ruvain doesn't want to be called, dishonest. So therefore, again, he'll make amends ultimately again with Shimon in some way. I will say it's such a tremendous Gemara, right? Think about this for just a moment, right? Reuven steals from Shimon, sells it to Levi. So now, remember, and then Levi improves the property. So again, by the way, the halacha in that case is as we mentioned it over here, which is that when it comes to principle, in other words, principle, when Levi comes back to Reuven, right? Because Shimon goes to Levi, takes back his property, Levi comes back to Reuven. So now Reuven owes Levi two things. Number one, principle, right? And number two, shevach, any improvements. Principle comes from even nechasim mishpat, even encumbered property of Reuven's, but shevach, improvements, only comes from unencumbered property. Fine, that's the halacha. What's interesting over here is that the Gemara says, Reuven, who stole from Shimon, at some point in time, he's going to do good by Shimon. He doesn't want to be called a thief. He doesn't want to be called a thief. If you don't want to be called a thief, don't steal. Right? So I mean, he doesn't want to be called a thief. He is a thief. Now the Rebbe will say, what do you see from here? You see from here that at the end of the day, the Yid, the Jew, I don't want to be a Rasha. I don't want to be a Rasha. I don't want to be known for my mistakes or for my misdeeds. It's not what I want. And even when I make those mistakes, even when I make those wrong turns in life, I do not want them to categorize me. I don't want them to characterize me, I don't want those to be the things that concretize my identity. I'm a good person, but I'm a good person who does bad things. But the whole chap is, I don't want those bad things to define me. The gazlan, right, the thief, what is the thief most worried about? The thief doesn't want to be known as a thief. Very simple, it's a don't steal. No, but he's going to steal. He's going to steal because that's what thieves do. They steal and we make mistakes. But what I want more than anything is not to be defined by my mistakes. And I will say, think about this. This is what we say to the Ribono Shel Olam each and every day, right? That I know I make mistakes and I know I make so many wrong turns in life. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I'm asking you not to see me through the lens of those mistakes and misdeeds. I'm asking you to see me through the good. I'm asking you to see me through the beauty. You, the Bochin Levi Lavos, you who are able to look into the heart of man, you know what's really in my neshama, what's really in my soul. Such an incredible idea. A Jew wants to be holy. And a Jew does not want to be a Baal Avera or a Baal Chet. I want to be a Baal Tshuva. I want to be a Tzaddik. I want to be Heilig. I want to be holy. I want to be Kadosh. That's all I want. But yet at the same time, I live with all of my frailties. The Gazlan doesn't want to be a Gazlan. And so somehow, some way, he's going to find a way to work it out. Kadosh Baruch Hu, you know that even with all of my mistakes, that's not who I want to be. Who do I want to be? I want to be a tzaddik. I want to be holy. I want to be elevated, and I want to be special. Incredible. Let's say Mishnah, here we go. So actually, this Mishnah is going to be good chazara because now, Bosai, we're actually coming back to the concept of psika ala peros. So remember again, this is how we actually started Ezun Neshech. So psika ala peros means a future contract. So in a very simple case, right, Reuven goes to Shimon and sells Shimon wheat, and he sells him $10,000 of wheat. So Shimon pays now, but is going to take delivery of the wheat in 6 months from now. That's psika la peros. So we lock in a price. Purchaser gives the seller the money, and seller delivers the produce at some future date. Says the Mishnah, in poskin ala peros at sheyetze ashar. I will say the halacha is that you can't do a future forward contract for produce unless, of course, the price is known. We've seen this already before. Yatz ashar, the price has to be known. Now, what's the logic of that? Why? Because since the price is known, because even though, right, Reuven is selling this to Shimon. So Reuven right now doesn't have any wheat. However, even though Reuven doesn't have, Reuven can get from Levi. So because of the produce is readily available and the price is known, even though the seller himself doesn't have it, he could easily obtain it. So it's as if Shimon already has possession of the wheat. And therefore, again, no potential ribis issue. Remember again, the issue we're concerned about over here with Psika Laperos, so the future forward contract, is that Reuven is going to go ahead and buy $10,000 worth of wheat at current prices. But let's say again, then there's fluctuation. So like this, the Gemara says, as long as the price is known, which also means that the produce is readily available, so therefore it's as if Shimon has already taken possession, even though he has not taken physical possession of the grain. Incredible. What happens if Reuven was one of the early harvesters? See, he's one of the first chaver that's harvesting, which means that there's not yet a set price. Posek imo ala gadish. Ultimately, I will say this is what we call yeshlo. So now Reuven could go ahead and make any price he wants with Shimon. Why? Because Reuven has the produce. So essentially, Allah says, since Reuven already has the produce, they could agree on a price. And even though, again, Shimon's not going to take possession of it until sometime later on, it's okay, because Reuven has the actual produce right now, which means it's a ki'ilu that Shimon has it. Look at Rashi. Rashi says over here, Posek imo, ve'izah sharshi yirtza, lases lo me'osa gadish. So, and they could agree on whatever price they agree to. Techevan diyeshlo, since Reuven has the produce, ein kan ribis. There's no ribis issue. Why is there no ribis issue? Because Shimon effectively acquires the grain now. Even though, again, Shimon didn't do Mashiach. He didn't take physical possession of it. So therefore, I will say again, remember, in all of these cases, we're dealing with rabbinic ribis at most. So therefore, again, Chazal said, these are the two ways that a future forward contract for produce works. Either number one, the price is known. If the price is known, then Allah Chalamaisa, it's readily available. If it's readily available, then we look at it as if Reuven has already delivered it to Shimon, and therefore Shimon's in possession of the produce. Okay, that's possibility one. Possibility two is Yeshlo. If Reuven himself actually has the produce, then when Shimon gives him the money, it's as if Shimon takes possession. Shimon already has it, even though he hasn't taken physical possession, and therefore no problem with ribis. The Allah avet shalanovim. So also you could do this with any type of produce, on a vat of grapes, vala ma'atan shal zesim, or ultimately again on a vat of olives. The al habeitzim shal yotzer. So this is interesting. Balls of clay of a potter. Right, let's say again, the potter has, I want to buy pottery. So I go over to Reuven. Reuven has balls of clay, and we lock in a price. So that's a case of Yeshlo. He has the balls of clay already, even though, again, he has not yet made the pottery. Valasid, Mishashaku Bekivshan. And same thing I will say, for making lime, so the moment that they put the ingredients into the pot to make the lime, ultimately, again, that's Yeshlo. Okay, the Gemara goes weiter. Uposek imo ala zeval kol imo sashana. And I will say Allah Chalamaisa. So again, Rashi just points out that al beitzim shel yotzer posik im yotzer ala kaderos be'ezeh shar sheyirtza fa'af api shel yotzer shar. So I will say this would be, let's say I want to go over to Reuven and I want to buy pottery. And again, let's say the price for pottery has not yet come out for the season, but Reuven has balls of clay. So because he had balls of clay, therefore Allah Chalamaisa, it's yeshlo, and therefore again the transaction is permitted. So we'll say, so bottom line, there are two, we've seen this already. Psika laperos, let's go through the concern. When I have a future contract for produce, the concern is I'm locking it in at a particular price right now, but I'm not receiving it till later. So the concern is maybe I'll get more, right? Maybe I'll get more than ultimately, again, I originally thought I was going to get, and we run into a potential ribis issue. This is not ribis daraisa, this is ribis darabanan. Because remember, ribis daraisa is only by loans, so this is by commercial transaction, so ribis darabanan. Chazal said that essentially, if you satisfy one of two criteria, either yatzashar, the price of the produce is known, or yeshlo, or the seller has the produce in his possession. Even though, again, in both of these cases, Shimon, the purchaser, is not taking possession of it until later on. As long as you have one of those two criteria, it is not a ribis transaction. Incredible. So we'll say you could go ahead and enter into a future contract for zevel, for manure, the entire year. Rabbi Yossi Omer in poskin ala zevel ele imken haisalo zevel ba'ashpa. Rabbi Yossi says, no, it's not true. You can only contract with Zevel, with Menor, future contract for Menor, if the seller has Menor. Ba'ashpa, and literally again in the garbage dump. The chum matirim, chum permit this. Again, we'll see exactly what this machlokes says in the Gemara. Posik imo b'shara gavoa. But ultimately, again, he could go ahead and he literally posik imo b'shara gavoa. So you're going to see what this means as well. This means Rashi says im yifchos hashar mimashu achshav titin lo keshara zol. So also we're going to see over here that halacha l'maisa in a situation of a price fluctuation, the purchaser has the ability to get the better of the two deals. Rashi says, it's the last short line in Rashi, if the price of whatever you're buying, whatever you're locking in the future contract goes down, titein lo kishar hazol, ultimately again, the borrower could pay the lender, or actually the purchaser could pay the seller the lower price. Okay, so we'll see exactly why that is. So now if the price goes down, the purchaser has the ability to pay the lower price. All right. I'm sorry. All right. Rabbi Huda says, so we'll see in the Gemara exactly what this machlokes is, but Rabbi Huda takes it a step further. Rabbi Huda says that in general, whenever the price goes down, the purchaser could always say to the seller, listen, we transacted to buy a bushel of wheat at $1,000. Now the price of wheat has gone down. So either honor the new lower price or give me back my money. Okay, so we'll see in the Gemara exactly what that is referring to. Fine, let's go back. It says the Gemara, Am Rabbi Asi. Let's get a little weiter over here. Am Rabbi Asi, Am Rabbi Yochanan. So remember again, the first thing the Mishnah taught me was this concept that halacha l'maisa, that yatsa hashar, that if the price of the commodity is known, then you can enter into a future contract. Now the Gemara is going to ask, how do you determine, in other words, what's called yatsa hashar, what's called the price is established? So Am Rabbi Asi, Am Rabbi Yochanan, in poskin al shar shebeshok, you can't use the pricing in the marketplace. Am Rabbi Zila Rabbi Asi, Am Rabbi Yochanan, afilu kidurmus hazeh, even like the central marketplace, and Rashi points out there are different types of marketplaces. There's like a small shuk, a small marketplace, but then there's like a central market. So you're telling me, generally, the central marketplace reflects the normative pricing. So I don't understand. So even the pricing in the central marketplace is not called yatsa hashar, is not called that pricing's been established. So Amar le lo. He said no. So the Gemara says, Amar le lo. Sorry. Amar le lo. Amar Rabbi Yochanan ela b'shuk shalayars. I'm sorry. The lo kvi tar aihu. So we'll say no. Rabbi Yochanan meant you don't establish general pricing based on the smaller marketplaces. Literally, again, the marketplaces of the individuals, of the villages. Rather, when establishing market value, we look at like the central marketplaces. But the small little marketplaces, what you see things selling for over there, is not necessarily reflective of the general marketplace. Okay, so the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, "Ella ulaman de salak adaitin meikara." Dam Rabbi Yochanan afilu kidurmas hazeh. So now in the Havamina, we thought Rabbi Yochanan was saying that even the prices, when they're established in the general marketplace, does not satisfy the criteria of yatsa hashar. The Gemara says, using that logic, elamasnisin diktani in poskin alaperos ashi yatsa hashar. So the Gemara says, yatsa hashar hechi mishkachasla. So we'll say if Rabbi Yochanan, in the Havamina, if Rabbi Yochanan was going to say that even market prices found in the general marketplace is not called yatsa hashar, it's not called yatsa hashar, then how would you ever establish yatsa hashar? To which the Gemara says, Masnisin dechiti da'akalbi va'arbi demashach taret fei. So we'll say perhaps the way we, in the Havamina, it's not how we paskin, but in the Havamina is that maybe yatsa hashar market pricing is established. Rashi says over here, be'avli be'akalbi va'arbi mishyaschilu balibatim va'osrei peros lifkos osroseim usfinos ba'os benar medios tvuah limkar. So we'll say, so apparently, after they exhaust the initial supply of produce, they would open up storehouses and ships would bring in produce. At that point, there was a lot more product available on the market. Prices would lower and kind of settle at an average rate that they would remain at for a longer amount of time. So in the Havamina, one might have thought that that's the pricing That's the pricing that establishes Yatsa Hashar. Kamash Mola know that Yatsa Hashar ultimately is when Yatsa Hashar is the market, the price as established in the general central marketplace. Incredible. Let's go a little bit weiter. Tan Rabbanon in Poskanal appears Ashi Yatsa Hashar. So remember again, you can't do future forward contracts for produce until you have a set market price. Sorry. Ashi Yatsa Hashar. Yatsa Hashar Poskan Afapi She'ein Lazeh Yesh Lazeh. So ultimately, again, halacha l'maisa, once the market price has been established, then under those circumstances, you could do a future forward contract. Why? Again, I will say the logic being that halacha l'maisa, having an established price is reflective, at least in times of the Gemara, is reflective of what we'll call established or normative supply. Because that's when the market kind of evens out. When there's enough produce to be able to take care of everyone's needs, that's when the pricing evens out. So therefore, again, at that point, even if the seller himself doesn't have the commodity, halacha l'maisa, it's easily attainable. Because it's easily attainable, it's as if the seller has it, and as if he's transferred it to the purchaser already, thereby obviating any concern of rabbinic riba. So we'll stop over here for today. Again, there are more examples of this, but we'll stop over here for today. I will say tremendous shkach. I'm sorry that I can't be there with you in person, but at least we have a great schus baruch Hashem learn together virtually. Wishing everyone a good Erev Shabbos, a beautiful Shabbos Kodesh, and halavai, besoros tovos for all of Klal Yisrael.